France had one of the largest and most powerful armies in Europe. Many believed that France and Great Britain would be able to withstand an invasion from Germany for many years, especially since Germany would have to go through the heavily fortified Maginot Line. However, all of this changed in just 6 weeks after German troops used new military tactics to bypass the Maginot Line and take the country. So how did Germany conquer France so fast? In May of 1940, Europe's fate hung in the balance. For 2 years, tensions had been high between the Allies and Germany. In September of 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and by October had won a decisive victory. The Polish army was no match for the Wehrmacht, and soon Poland was under German control. As if learning from their success in Poland, Germany wasted no time before striking again. This time they set their sights on Denmark, and on April 1940, German troops crossed into the small country. Like Poland, Denmark was quickly defeated and became the second country to fall to Germany. Now it was clear to everyone that Germany was unstoppable. They had taken down not one, but 2 countries in less than a year. Now the pressure was on for the Allies to stop Germany. But where did they strike? Well, the answer was simple: France. Since the beginning of the war, France had sent troops to support the Allies. When Germany attacked Poland, France sent out the First Army to help defend the Polish city of Lubelski. And when the Soviet Union invaded Poland soon after, French troops helped evacuate refugees. At the start of April, over 70,000 French troops were in western Poland, with another 28,000 stationed in northern France. So when Germany invaded Denmark, the French were right next door, eager to help. And what a force the French had assembled. France had fought in World War I and learned some very valuable lessons. The biggest lesson was that the future of war would be decided by armored vehicles. So as soon as the guns fell silent along the Western Front, France began developing their tank force. By the end of the 1920s, France had 468 tanks. During the Spanish Civil War, France provided over 500 volunteers to fight the nationalists, along with 40 tanks. These tanks were then sent back to France and used as training material. Not only was the French tank force growing, but so was the rest of the army. By 1939, France boasted the 3rd largest army in the world with 100 divisions. The British also joined the effort in France, sending over 8 divisions to assist. In all, the Allies had 7 armored divisions totaling around 1,800 tanks. Now, while the Allies had a formidable force in France, it wasn't exactly utilized properly. The reason for this was the lack of experience among the French commanders. You see, since the end of World War I, France had enjoyed peace. This led to the French generals believing that war would be just like the previous one, full of trench warfare and stalemates. So they trained their troops accordingly. But what France didn't realize was that times had changed. War in the 1940s was much different than the 19. New technologies had emerged, and combat tactics had evolved. The French simply were not prepared for this. So with inexperienced commanders and outdated tactics, the Allies felt confident they could defend France for years. Unfortunately for them, they couldn't have been more wrong. As we all know by now, on May 10, 1940, German troops crossed into Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. The Allies were caught completely off guard. Once the Allied troops realized what was happening, they desperately raced to the border to try to stop the Germans. Some were successful, but many weren't. By May 14, 1940, the Allies were pushed back all the way to Belgium and France. And the worst part was that the Allies were split in 2. Between the Sambre River and the Weser River were 38,000 Belgian soldiers, 33,000 French troops, and 18,000 British soldiers. Meanwhile, another 45,000 British soldiers were defending the beaches of Dunkirk. But those soldiers were only a small part of a much larger problem. See, the French commanders had been worried about the troops being split in 2, so they pulled reserves to the front to make sure it wouldn't happen. The only problem was that those reserves were unexperienced, and the commanders were inexperienced in commanding large groups of inexperienced soldiers. So what happened next was nothing short of disastrous. Even though the Allies had managed to successfully hold the line in several places, such as at Lille, they were pushed back everywhere else. By May, the Allies were once again in trouble. But this time it was much worse, because the Germans were advancing towards the coast, effectively cutting off the Allied retreat. But if you think this is bad, it gets much worse. What happened next shocked the Allies. You see, the Allies desperately needed supplies to continue fighting, so airfields across France were immediately converted into supply bases. But soon those supply bases were bombed relentlessly by the Luftwaffe. This made supplying the troops almost impossible. But even if the Allies could get food and ammunition to their troops, morale was low. Everyone was exhausted and demoralized. Morale was especially low among the British troops. You see, the British Expeditionary Force was supposed to help the French, but now they were causing a huge burden on French resources. Not only were the French losing the war, but now they had to feed and supply tens of thousands of British soldiers too. As the situation became more and more dire, the French commanders knew that something had to be done, and done fast. So, on May 26, 1940, the French government met with the British, and together they decided to pull the remaining Allied troops away from the front, instead focus on defending the coast. On May 28, 1940, the Allies abandoned all areas east of a line drawn between Le Pinet, Royan, and the Swiss border. With the Allies retreating, the Germans were quick to advance. The French called up all available reserves and prepared to defend the coast. Meanwhile, the Germans were preparing for one final push to end the war in one swift move. On May 10, 1940, German troops crossed into France. Their goal was to reach the English Channel within 6 days. This would sever the Channel ports and force the Allies into the English Channel. From there, the Allies could either surrender or be captured. The German plan was daring, risky, but if it worked, it would end the war in just 2 weeks. The operation was called Fall Marin, or Red Case. First, the Germans planned to attack through Belgium and Luxembourg. The French were expecting this, so they positioned most of their troops there. The Germans hoped this would lure the French into sending reinforcements to the north, leaving the center vulnerable. As the French sent troops to the north, German forces would race through the Ardennes forest. If all went well, the French would have no choice but to surrender. The German plan depended on speed. If they took even a single wrong step, the Allies could regroup and launch a counterattack. The first stage of the plan went perfectly. The Germans crossed into Belgium and began driving the Allies closer and closer to the coast. But then something unexpected happened. The Allies did send reinforcements to the north, which meant that the Germans were correct in assuming that the French would react this way. But the French didn't send just any reinforcements. They sent their best and most experienced troops. So the Germans found themselves fighting against some of the best soldiers France had to offer. Fortunately for the Germans, they were able to hold off the Allies long enough for the second stage of the plan. On May 14, 1940, German troops crossed into the Ardennes forest. Unlike the Allies, who expected the Germans to come straight through the forest, the Germans had studied the area extensively. They knew the terrain better than anyone, and the Allies had no idea they were coming. The Germans divided their forces into three: von Rundstedt's army, which was to drive towards Sedan; Hoff's army, which was to drive towards the Somme River; and the LSS troops, whose job was to secure the flanks. By May 15, 1940, German troops had pushed the Allies all the way back to the Seine River. Now the Germans were close enough to the English Channel that they could threaten the port cities. This forced the French to send even more troops to the coast, which left von Rundstedt's army wide open. On May 16, 1940, von Rundstedt's army reached the strategically important city of Sedan. The French were hoping that the troops at Sedan would be able to hold off the Germans until reinforcements arrived, but they were wrong. May 17, 1940, German troops crossed the Meuse River. The French commanders knew that if the Germans captured the city, then the entire western flank would collapse. So they ordered General Gamillon to evacuate civilians from the city and hold Sedan at all costs. Meanwhile, the French commander at Sedan, General Martel, ordered his troops to dig in and prepare for a long siege. But once again, the French commanders were wrong. Within hours of crossing the river, German troops had entered the city. Martel's troops were forced to flee, and soon, heavy fighting was taking place outside the city. The following day, the Germans pressed their attack, but as the sun rose on May 19, 1940, the French lines began to crumble. More and more French troops fled across the river, and soon, Sedan had fallen. With Sedan in their hands, the Germans quickly advanced west. By May 20, 1940, the Germans had reached the Somme River. The French sent reinforcements to the Somme River, but it was too late. the Germans were already digging in on the other side of the river. Meanwhile, the rest of the German troops raced south. On May 21, 1940, German troops reached the Loire River. With the Germans getting so close to the Loire, the French commanders knew that something had to be done, and done fast. On May 23, 1940, the French government declared martial law and ordered the army to attack the Germans at all costs. The French threw everything they had at the Germans, but it wasn't enough. The Germans were too strong, and they continued to advance. By May 26, 1940, the Germans were only 50 miles from Paris. With the Germans getting so close to the capital, the French government knew that it was only a matter of time before Paris fell. On May 28, 1940, the Germans took Paris without firing a single shot. The French commanders knew that the war was lost, so they called for a ceasefire. On June 1940, France surrendered. But wait, there's more. What's really amazing is that the entire war lasted only 6 weeks. How did Germany defeat one of the most powerful armies in the world in just 6 weeks? Well, the answer is simple. The Germans used new military tactics to bypass the French defenses. Before the battle even started, the Germans struck a devastating blow by quickly conquering Denmark and Belgium. This left the French with no time to mobilize their troops. The Germans then used a combination of fast tanks, motorized infantry, and dive bombers to rush through the Ardennes forest. The French were unable to stop the Germans, and soon the entire Western Front collapsed. The Germans then raced towards the English Channel, forcing the French to send more troops to the coast. This left the Germans free to capture Paris and forced the French surrender. The Battle of France was a stunning victory for Germany and a devastating defeat for France. The Germans had conquered one of the most powerful armies in the world in just 6 weeks. France had fallen like a house of cards. The reasons for the French defeat are complex and far-reaching. In hindsight, it's easy to see the warning signs that France ignored. Their army was unprepared for modern warfare. Their generals were inexperienced and outdated. In their tactics, France was slow to recognize the threat posed by Germany and even slower to take action. As a result, they were caught off guard when the Germans attacked. The Battle of France was a wake-up call for the Allies. It showed them the true strength of the German war machine and the cost of complacency. France's defeat was a turning point in World War II. It marked the end of the war in Europe and the beginning of the fight for survival. Dunkirk was an important event in World War II, but it's often overshadowed by D-Day. Nevertheless, Dunkirk was a crucial moment in the war. It was the point at which the British Army was saved from annihilation. Had the British not been able to escape Dunkirk, they likely would have been defeated in France. This would have had a massive impact on the outcome of the war. Dunkirk showed the world the tenacity of the human spirit. In the face of certain death, ordinary men performed extraordinary acts of bravery. They risked their lives to save others, and in doing so, they won the admiration of the world. Dunkirk is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail. Thanks for watching.